Hi, this is Cecily Roach, and this is a short video clip in order to provide feedback to the Senior Soft group that have just completed part 3 of the Professionalism and Ethics Assessment. That's been a 10-11 day process as groups in the online environment, further to the work you had done on November 11th. This is general feedback. The grades are now available to you, and they have been broken down into the 5 criteria as identified in the guiding rubric. So in order that you can make good use of that level of detail as a format of feedback, I'm just going to run through those 5 criteria and give you a sense of where perhaps some of you didn't do quite as well as you would like to have. However, I'd stress at the beginning that the performance was generally excellent and the grades do reflect that. So the first criterion was engages with the opinions of others and negotiates towards consensus. Now, 1 or 2 of the groups didn't actually reach consensus, or forgot, in one case I think, to post what their preferred choices from the list of 12 action options would be. So obviously for those groups, the grades they got under criterion 1 would necessarily have been affected and been lower. The other reason why, if you didn't get the grade you'd anticipated for criterion 1, had been that there was a minority of students just restated their own opinions rather than engaging with what other members in the group had suggested that might have been of a differing opinion or differing starting point. And they just restated their own rather than engaging, showing that they'd seen those different opinions and engaging and saying why they believed that their suggested action option was better. Of course, that first criterion also had that element of dealing with conflict when it arises, i.e. not ignoring where other people differ in their opinions. Anyway, hopefully that helps you with that one. The second one was around content and use of resources. And this really did surprise me. The first part of it, comprehensive and accurate coverage of concepts in the dilemma, this was dealt with to a really high standard in most groups. A couple of groups really excelled themselves, often prompted by 1 or 2 members posting very comprehensive and insightful analyses of the scenario, and then the group took off from there. However, the second half of that was twofold. 1, clarifying queries that arise in the forum, and always referencing sources correctly. And as you look down through the grading elements of that piece of the rubric, I have to say a lot of groups, the majority of groups, put no references at all in. To the extent that anyone who did bring in a reference probably got the full 12% there. And of course there are a number that would be in mind. The PSI guidelines alone, there's one specifically on influenza. HAC have one specifically on influenza, and there were others referenced in spots throughout the discussions. What was also referenced throughout the discussions were both the Data Protection Act and the new guidelines by the PSI. And most groups felt there were potential data protection issues in this scenario. I would clarify that they were potential. At the point in the time when that scenario happened, it isn't necessarily that at that point in time the Data Protection Act has already been breached. Oh, just some ideas there. If you didn't get the grades you expected, I would expect for most of you it was around that question of referencing resources. There were a couple of references to herd immunity, but they were much more scarce than I anticipated. Therefore, I've just uploaded in under the folder for ICM 13 on Blackboard. I've just uploaded one general reference on herd immunity for you. The third criterion, participation in the process in a respectful manner. And if you look across the grading elements of this, you see in the first instance netiquette being evident at all times. And of course netiquette guidelines are that you engage in a timely fashion, you engage regularly. So for some people there was an absolute push in the last day with post after post after post. So while that was of use to the group, in reality it was too late to really influence decision making and be of support to your team members. So it wasn't just about the number of posts, but when you made them, and that's wrapped up in netiquette. Of course, the specifics of that criterion include timely contributions and evidence of reflective listening on a consistent basis. So not just that the posts were insightful and bringing in references, but that the posts you made reflected that you had read and internalized contributions from other team members. And of course that's all part of why this is done over 10-11 days rather than in a 24-hour period. So hopefully you have a bit of help there. Expression was the next criterion on the rubric. Student uses grammatically correct sentences on a regular basis, and generally that was fine, but that notion that you express ideas clearly, concisely, cogently and in a logical fashion. And I do think that in some instances that word concise could be taken on board. As you've all probably discovered by now, it takes time to read these discussion fora. So while I wouldn't for a moment be curtailing people in the contributions they'd make, if you can write it in 100 words, your teammates will just appreciate that rather than a 500-word extended version of what could be said more concisely, while it should still be clear, cogent and logical. Very rare misspellings I would expect too, because this is asynchronous communication. It's not like that very first day where you were responding to the dilemma live, and therefore it mightn't be time to just have a second look on the spellings. And the final one, of course, on the rubric, which was the first item I graded, was we had discussed on the day, it's in the rubric, it was in the instructions, the first thing you were to do was to post up what you had submitted for part 1, which was your initial, at that point in time, reaction to the dilemma, at a point in time before you had the benefit of seeing the 12 potential action options. And you were also to upload, in order of preference, in that first post, your 3 most and 3 least preferred action options, followed of course by your justification option choices, which would have been made on the basis of your most preferred action option. Now most people did that exactly as directed, required. Some didn't, and obviously that lost you 12% right there, or up to 12%. Some people just uploaded part 1 and then didn't give their action choices. Part of teamwork is about sharing information that you do have available, and this assessment process is a learning process, but that first step of it is deliberately put in place to encourage you to share the perspective you had before you saw the action options, and then the choices you made independently before having the benefit of your peers and a peer discussion forum to give you what can be very powerful feedback. Hope that helps. We will have the final workshop. You are in half-class groups for that. Please do check which time you are to be there. It's groups 1 to 6 from the 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. slot, and groups 7 to 12 for the second hour. You will work independently online for a short amount of time and then be in groups. Looking forward to seeing you then. Hope this has been helpful, and we'll see you next week.